Welcome to Civic Warriors, brought to you by Witham. On this podcast, we bring the conversation to you, sharing engaging stories that motivate and build consensus in the nonprofit community. This podcast is about the innovators, the leaders on the front lines of adversity, guiding lights in the nonprofit industry affecting change. And through their stories, we can all join forces to become Civic Warriors. Hey Warriors, welcome to today's episode of Civic Warriors, brought to you by Witham. I'm your host, Brad Caruso, leader of Witham's not-for-profit practice. Today's guest is Donald Overton, National Executive Director of Blind Veterans Association, a 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. BVA serves as ambassadors and mentors for all veterans and their families coping with sight loss. BVA continually strives to better the lives of all who served in the armed forces, living with sight loss through expert advocacy, engaged membership, clear communication, and peer-inspired self-reliance. Our BVA family epitomizes respect, honor, dedication, and commitment to sustain a thriving, informed, patriotic, and connected community. So certainly an organization that helps many, helps our veterans, and is doing a lot of good for the world on the advocacy front. And really an exciting episode to talk about a few of these things that are often untalked about. So with all that said, Don, I appreciate your time, and welcome to the Civic Warriors Show today.
Thanks, Brad. Really appreciate the opportunity to come together with you
Awesome.
today.
So why don't we start off? Maybe share a little bit about your background and then also how you arrived at BVA.
Sure. I born and raised up in New England. I'm a Connecticut native, Fairfield County. Grew up participating in a lot of sports. I was a swimmer. Primarily, but played football, lacrosse, baseball, you name it. I tried to be as active as I could as a child. After high school, relocated down into Virginia, started a small family business in the Virginia area, and eventually found myself looking for new opportunities, and that's what drove me into the military. Joined the United States Army, went on to complete my initial training in communications, went to jump school, and ended up stationed with the 82nd Airborne Division, which is really where I stayed for my time in the military. Deployed to multiple combat fronts, first down for Operation Just Cause in Panama, and then Operation Desert Shield, eventually Desert Storm in the Middle East. And I was blinded during combat operations in March of 1990 timeframe. So that led me to be medically retired from the military after I went through my different surgical procedures and such at Walter Reed, and eventually went on to get my college degrees in social work, but I was a policy wonk. Did my internships in congressional offices, eventually worked as a congressional staffer, but then got into the military and veterans advocacy battle space some 30 years ago, and I've been here ever since.
What makes one as you said, an advocacy wonk? What makes one interested in policy?
I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's interesting. You know, you look at the challenges, I think. So not just the challenges, I think, that we all experience today with the divisiveness of our political system, but looking at really how do we improve and better the various policies, programs and services that are in place. And when you look at the complexity and you look at, an agency like the Department of Veterans Affairs, the second largest federal agency in place, and the myriad benefit programs and services that are there, you're constantly looking to make sure that the benefits are keeping pace with what the lived experience is of our stakeholder communities. And so there's a constant challenge of back and forth. And given, the current, again, divisiveness of the political system, you're constantly battling for very limited resources in the appropriations front, but trying to ensure that you're, creating the best possible opportunity for individuals to transition back after military service. And so I've always enjoyed it. I really started off early on learning the claims system. I had to live that myself in transitioning off of active duty. It was a very broken system. I'll never forget. I literally had to move back in with my mother post-military because I was separated. I was medically retired from the military with only a 30% disability rating as a blinded individual from active duty, which was a couple $100 a month is what I had in my pocket. And I had to figure life out. Eventually, as I learned the claim system, began to understand how the Department of Veterans Affairs interacts with the Department of Defense, and then, everything that you need to do to really understand how complex these benefit systems are. How can we improve that experience? How can we ensure that folks don't slip through the cracks? I think that was really the driver for me. So it was my lived experience, and then wanting to ensure that other individuals didn't have to go through some of the similar challenges that I did.
Yeah, that's amazing that continuing to give back and continuing to, you've been obviously through the resources and systems that exist, and now you've identified mechanisms by which you can improve it. And as potentially a fair statement we can say is the world in the policy world doesn't necessarily move at the same pace as the rest of the world, or sometimes it takes a lot to change some little things, but those little things could go a long way in improving the livelihood of many of the individuals you serve.
There's no doubt you're spot on with that. As a matter of fact, just prior to joining you today, I was reading an article in Military Times. We've been advocating for legislation similar to what I just discussed 30 years ago. I experienced this, the Major Richard Starr Act that's out there, which is trying to create policy allowing individuals who cannot complete 20 years of active military service as a result of military-related disabilities. We have to choose an either or. We either choose the Department of Defense benefit package or the Department of Veterans Affairs based on our disabilities. The Major Richard Starr Act would restore, and it would give us access to both lines of benefits to help improve both the quality of life and access to additional health care and other types of benefits and resources. So, so 30 years later, we've been championing this, and we're still struggling to ever get it across the finish line. So that's just one example of many.
One of many, yeah. Maybe if you could share for the audience as well, for the individuals that you serve, what are some of the common challenges, faced by individuals suffering from blindness, and other ailments coming back from combat and other deployments, and what are some of the common misconceptions that you come across? Maybe help the audience understand a little bit of what some of those challenges are. And you've already talked about a couple of them, obviously, through your lived experiences, but maybe if you could share a little more about that, and then we'll dive into some of the programs that you're doing to help with some of those challenges.
Yeah, I think specifically related to blindness, it's an ever increasing challenge for our military personnel as you look at modern warfare and just the nature of the environments and the austere environments that most deployments are involved with. It's not always just blasts, which I experienced. There's so many opportunities for us to damage something that's as delicate and sensitive as the human eye. And sometimes it's just being in those environments, right? If you deploy to a desert region, just the abrasiveness of sand and the damage it can do. So it's a growing problem for our individuals. It's approximately 7 to 8% of all combat related injuries are ocular injuries, and so it's a huge number. Department of Veterans Affairs, our association, Blinded Veterans Association, has been a congressionally chartered association. We're celebrating our 80th anniversary this year. The congressional charter means that we have a direct voice with Congress, but we also have some oversight responsibilities with different agencies, first and foremost being the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so we do play a critical role there in our advocacy on behalf of this community. But a couple of years ago, blind rehabilitation service within the department expanded its mission, and it went from serving just blind individuals, and blindness, legal blindness, was defined as best corrected vision of 2200 An optometrist and ophthalmologist would basically measure the visual acuity and or visual field loss. How much field of vision individuals have. There's a lot that goes into kind of making those determinations. But the expansion expanded to include low vision because there's a huge low vision. And as a result of comorbidity, whether it's diabetes, type 2 diabetes that so many of our Vietnam veterans experience as a result of dioxin, Agent Orange exposures, you see this natural progression of diminished visual acuity across the aging. And so we see this huge influx with that cohort of individuals. So VA went from serving about 150,000 blind individuals in that service line to 1.2 million when you take low vision in. And so we expanded our mission as well. And so, we captured this much larger community. And I think that lends itself to the challenges out there. I think I was doing a press conference with members of Congress this week on some legislation we were working on and some other challenges. And we were up at the Capitol, and one member of Congress came up to me and put his hands on my shoulders and said, how blind are you? And so we get that a lot. And that's the whole thing. Blindness is as unique as each of us is unique, right? So we go along the extremes from total darkness, somebody who's lost all sight, to individuals that, might just be dealing with some blurring of vision or have some different limitations, whether it's some visual field loss that might progress over time. Some folks are seeing, multiple images. Their brains are not processing the visual signals properly. And so the sky's really the limit when you look at it. And so there's so many variables that are out there. And I think, probably some of the misconceptions that are out there are, what are blind people capable of? Pretty much anything. We're differently abled, right? So we don't ever look at ourselves necessarily as being disabled, but just differently abled. We go about the world in a different style. Some of the things are extremely antiquated. For those of us that don't use a guide dog, we still push around a long white stick. That's decades and decades and decades, and that's just to help us to identify different obstacles and things for safety features. But there's a lot of new emerging technologies that are going to help improve, I think, the levels of independence for all of us. We're involved in most of those, everything from transportation assets to accessing the digital front doors, and I think the world has become more and more visual. So there's definitely challenges there, and that's where a lot of our advocacy comes in helping to ensure that the world takes into consideration and accommodates the needs of this very, very large cohort of society.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of things that I imagine a lot of people don't necessarily think about, but you just mentioned it there, right? Like as you said, like the world is becoming more virtual. The common buzzword of today is AI and and a screen, as opposed to maybe something more physical. Or do you feel that the world is keeping up with assisting individuals with blindness or mostly blindness? Do you feel the world is keeping up with that with technology advancements, or do you feel there's a lot of room for improvement there, or there are things you're working on currently that are kind of advocating for and improving access to or tools that assist individuals? What do you see on that front?
Yeah, it's some of the biggest challenges for us. So a couple of years ago, it was really, I think, one of our greatest accomplishments of recent time. And we moved a piece of legislation. It was website accessibility, and we moved it initially through the Department of Veterans Affairs. And we were looking at the true challenges. We were being left behind. Blind individuals were not able to access the resources on a level playing field, if at all. As well as, and the pandemic really highlighted this breakdown as we move to more and more technology, such as kiosk self check-in systems and all of these other types of systems, and accessibility wasn't being taken into consideration. So as we move towards telehealth and these other components, and so individuals out there that were utilizing assistive technology, those technologies weren't being integrated into these platforms. The Department of Veterans Affairs invested billions and billions of dollars in a new electronic health record, and one of the very first things that we identified is it lacked accessibility. It was coded wrong to even allow accessible technologies to be able to interact and integrate, and that resulted in kind of a stop with some other challenges that were being experienced there. But the website accessibility, getting that signed into law was the catalyst for the Department of Justice to finally step in. We had the Americans with Disabilities Act that was, signed into law back in the 90s. We had the Rehabilitation Act back in the 70s. All of these major disability policy initiatives attempted to address these concerns, but there was never any teeth. And so there was never any real mandates or any opportunity to begin to sanction or to put, real effort behind ensuring the accessibility challenges that were there. So this legislation did that with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and then the Department of Justice stepped in. Thankfully, we had meetings with them, and they looked at a whole of government. So they looked at the federal sector first, and ensuring that all federal agencies began to address the accessibility challenges, whether those were websites, apps, kiosks, anything that you can imagine that would allow an individual to be able to access goods or services. And they've expanded that just recently. They expanded that down to state and local governments. So you're now seeing a concerted effort at the state and local government levels to remediate websites, to remediate any of these types of services. And eventually it'll go all the way down to the private sector. Being sensitive, giving folks time to understand what the requirements are that are put out, how to come into conformance and compliance with these types of regulatory aspects. And so we're extremely hopeful that this continues its positive trend. We've seen tremendous results coming out of the Department of Veterans Affairs. They've got a long ways to go, but we're very sensitive to what this cultural transformation requires, and it requires a full life cycle approach. The VA needs to understand that when they go out and put a request for proposal out on the street for any type of technology or really any resource whatsoever, that accessibility is taken into consideration. And then that will run the full life cycle, right? From deployment all the way through retirement of whatever that system is, ensuring that accessibility is there. And they're beginning to do all the right things, doing things like enterprise licensing to ensure that, if it's software related, that everybody's on the same system with the same support and the same opportunity to update and things along those lines. And that just really helps to drive down the overall cost for all of these types of systems. And it's a common sense approach, but it was lacking for a really long time. So we're excited for what we're seeing in those regards.
What is the time frame? So, from something being enacted, if you will, and I might be using incorrect terminology here, but let's say it goes from, enacted as a law to actually like a substantive change in action. What is the time lag typically with that, call it a bill gets approved or, the action gets taken to actually substantive implementation? What type of time frame is that?
It's a long process. I'm not gonna. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. For us, with the website accessibility, there was a requirement, and we were good when we worked with our champions in Congress to ensure that we did have some definitive timelines in place. And so VA was required to produce a report in the first year. right? And then to go forward. Legislation is all unique when you look at it. There's once you get something signed into law, then you have to begin to look at the regulatory process, and the federal agencies have to begin to look at what the regs are, and that gets opened up for public comment, and then you end up with directives. And so it can be years and years and years of the back and forth process and trying to get everything in place to ensure that what the intent of Congress was actually is enacted. And we don't always get it right, unfortunately. There's a lot of times that, everybody's best intentions just miss the mark. And we see that all the time with legislation. And then Congress has to come back and basically, start over again, start the policy process over again with new legislation that then goes through this entire process all over again.
Yeah, there definitely is. It's part of the battle is the advocacy work. Part of the battle is the law passing, and then part of the battle is the implementation, and all of those things, as it sounds, take time to do. And as understandable, there are some structural changes and some significant changes in, policy as well as operation that are being introduced. So, but yeah, I can imagine that that's not a short process. Therefore, it's, point being more imperative, the work you're doing and how you're doing it. Certainly time is of the essence sometimes because, although we're doing things currently, it takes a long time for them to actually, hit the public and hit the individuals that are actually receiving the benefit of that action.
There's no doubt. Even just building off of this, right? We look at website accessibility. We got that signed into law in the prior administration, right? So the Trump administration signed that legislation into law. The Biden administration came in. You had a whole transition of leadership at the federal levels. That always stalls all of these processes. It takes time to get folks up and operational, and we looked at those, but we knew that there were going to be continued challenges, and we were sensitive to that. And so we worked through the legislative channels, not just to get the initial legislation signed into law, but we looked at wanting to ensure that the agency had what it needed to be able to implement. And so one of the things that we went to MILCON VA, the Military Construction and Department of Veterans Affairs Appropriations Committees, and we got language included in MILCON VA appropriations looking for a chief accessibility officer, somebody that would be accountable at the agency to oversee implementation and to begin to break down. When you look at these federal agencies, they're so siloed, and it's just it's a natural situation just given the size of these agencies, right? That everybody is working on their unique missions, and oftentimes not everybody understands how to be complementary to what other people are working on. And so we wanted to try to equip the VA, and the VA was resistant to it. The secretary actually proclaimed, "I am the chief accessibility officer." And so we spent, several years going back and forth congressionally with pointing out that, with all due respect, sir, you're failing. You have a lot on your plate as the secretary of such a large agency. So we're moving now, and here we are multiple years later, but we just cleared the House this week, and we're going over to the Senate with really what our flagship legislation is right now to help ensure that the original legislation continues to advance, and that's standing up a Veterans Accessibility Advisory Committee. And so that would allow stakeholders, disabled veterans, subject matter experts to actually come together formally, and the secretary then has to meet with that advisory committee. It can help do a lot of the initial work for the secretary, but give the secretary, really what they need to be able to be successful in implementation and to not be called before Congress repeatedly for hearings and things to look at the status. And so we cleared the House. Unfortunately, the VA is going to resist our efforts in the Senate. They don't like the accountability factors in the other areas. So we'll be working hard over the next week or so to help motivate our senators to ensure that we get this legislation over the finish line as well. And we're relatively confident. We've got good bipartisan, bicameral support on this, as well as a lot of energy in the military and veteran service organization space to get this committee established. And again, we look at this as being an asset to the VA. So we'll see. We'll see how we make out on that. And hopefully this will be the driver to ensure that the VA continues its current streak of being successful in implementation of the original legislation.
See, I mean, you've talked about this a lot in kind of discussing the legislative work you're doing, and it seems like just outsider looking in, not having a ton of direct involvement, but in totality, it seems like you've been successful with your efforts and your advocacy work that you are doing. What are some of the keys to success there for other organizations that are maybe not in the same issue, but different global issues that exist? What are some of the keys to success that you have employed that you feel aid in successful advocacy work when it comes to taking an idea, a change that you want to make, to bringing it to the point of fruition, implementation down at the other end of the spectrum? What are some of those strengths that you've employed that have been helpful in making that happen, or in being successful in the process?
Patience. Patience.
We all need
that. Patience. Yeah, a lot of patience. Yeah, and again, I think one of the greatest challenges right now is just how divisive our political systems are. And so there are challenges, and there are so many competing interests. And so it's really, taking time. I think for us, one of the things that we do is we make sure that we identify what the specific need is, and we really do everything in our power to define that need, to be able to show that there's definitely a large group of individuals, right, that are going to somehow benefit from it. And by the same token, I mean, that's the way our political system works, right? It's got to be beneficial both to the consumer, whether that's on the goods and services side, but it's also got to be beneficial to the member of Congress. So that's what you're going to want to do. It takes a lot of strategic planning and looking at who are the champions going to be, right? So for us, it's always important that we're looking at how to bring a bipartisan coalition together, because if you can get both sides of the aisle to champion a piece of legislation, then being able to build the co-sponsors and getting more and more people at the congressional level involved. And then it's the education and the awareness, making sure that you're also engaging with whatever agency is going to be responsible for implementation, understanding what their challenges are, right? So going to Congress to get legislation passed is one thing, but if you hamstring an agency, or you put them in a position where it creates so many additional challenges, it's going to stall. It's going to create a lot of other chaos, and you don't want to cause harm either. So you always want to try to be as complimentary as you possibly can be. But like we were just talking about, sometimes, unfortunately, you have to speak truth to power. And so sometimes it means, standing up and taking that stand and saying, with all due respect, this needs to be done, and this is why. And that's often when you'll see us, go to the media and try to pull those additional resources of really pulling at the heartstrings then of individuals and showing specifically what the impact of not doing something is to individuals. And so it's such a multifaceted, it all depends. There's some legislation you can go up and it makes sense and it benefits everybody involved. There's other times when, you've got adversarial approaches and the competing interests, right? The hardest thing today for anybody, especially if you're trying to move something at the federal sector, is that everything gets scored. There's a scorecard with the Congressional Budget Office, right? You've got to have the money to pay for whatever it is that you're attempting to do. And so today, that means that something has to be given up for something to take its place. And so you want to make sure that you're not causing harm. We talked about the advisory committee. we're sensitive to the fact that what you don't want to do is create a million advisory committees. So there's several advisory committees that are still on the books at the Department of Veterans Affairs, but for all intents and purposes, they're defunct. So we intentionally put in that we would replace a defunct advisory committee. We're not trying to expand this and continue to expand it. We're being sensitive to the fact that we're not trying to grow government or grow any of these other programs, but what we're trying to do is perhaps replace an antiquated system that's there that's no longer useful with something that needs to be done today. And so it's really understanding the full life cycle of the legislation, what the impact of the legislation is going to be, making sure that you can do the storytelling around that to show that it is going to have significant benefit. And then the members of Congress are obviously looking for opportunities to appeal to their voter bases. And so they want accomplishments. They need to have accomplishments. And so identifying the right individuals that can, sponsor and or co-sponsor legislation is critically important as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. Those are all very, I appreciate you sharing that clarity and additional information. It's definitely helpful to understand it. I know from my perspective, I haven't really been in the advocacy world too much. So it certainly, gives a little more clarity, and a lot of, listeners, and individuals supporting you, there's a significant amount of hard work, relationship building, trust, political correctness with how you say things, collaboration, and first, foremost, and lastly, patience, as you mentioned. So, certainly appreciate those thoughts. It definitely helps, those that are kind of embarking on something similar to understand, what's involved.
Yeah, and thick skin. There's a lot of times where everybody puts together every year. Those of us that do have a congressional charter, we do annual testimony once a year, and so we're sensitive. You need to monitor what's happening around us in this battle space, right? So what are the other military and veteran service organizations focused on? What can we collaborate on, right? One of the biggest accomplishments for all of us recently was the PACT Act, which was honoring those individuals that have different environmental exposures. Military service creates all kinds of exposures, not just combat related exposures, right? But just working on different types of machinery. If we go back again to our Vietnam era, our pre-Vietnam era, most of the ships and the submarines, right, we're dealing with a lot of toxic substances. And so, people had all these exposures. You look at Camp Lejeune and the Camp Lejeune, water situation. And so there's all of these things that are out there. But the PACT Act was successful because it was, again, bipartisan, bicameral at the congressional level. VA supported the expansion of eligibility for individuals, but the entire military and veteran service organization communities came together collaboratively to push that. And we all pretty much agreed to move the rest of our annual legislative priorities down to ensure we could get that over the finish line as we looked at things like that Congressional Budget Office scoring and those other components to be sensitive to all of that. So there's a lot of negotiations that go on, different advocacy groups coming together, and you'll stand down sometimes some of your priorities and your initiatives being sensitive to, these other areas and opportunities would benefit a larger number of individuals, and being sensitive to all of that, I think, is extremely helpful. And then, when the time is right and you have a piece of legislation and you can really and truly stand there and present that case, then you'll have the support of your sister associations coming together to support you championing that, and then you build the momentum and get the wind at your back to help push, your legislation over the finish line as well.
Got it. Yeah. And then deal with everything along the way.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. So
deal with it as it comes.
It's definitely, it's an interesting, it's definitely a fascinating process to be a part of.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Yeah. Switching gears a little bit, just thinking about a couple questions I always receive, or a couple things that I, always want to make sure that, if we can educate the public on, and just talking about the constituency you serve. If you encounter someone, let's say, blind in your travels and walking down the street, at a bus stop, wherever you may be, what's the most respectful way to approach them, to help them, to, obviously we want to treat everyone with respect, but, from your perspective, what do you think is a helpful thing people can do, or how would you approach somebody and, do it in the right way?
It does, Brad, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it, because all too often I think what we find, and so I'll use myself as an example, but we all in our community talk about it. When we go down a street, and for me, whether it was when I did have a guide dog, although my guide dog drew a lot of attention and people wanted to interact with me much more when I had the guide dog. When I had the white cane, it's like the parting of the Red Sea. Everybody just out of and they're being respectful, but there's an avoidance, and I think it's a fear of not knowing how to interact, right, and not knowing what the right thing to do. What I find to be the best approach, and I'm very fortunate. Our national headquarters is in Old Town Alexandria, just outside of Washington, D.C., and it's a great community. A lot of, history, but the old, brick sidewalks and things still. And there's a lot of pedestrian and foot traffic and everything out there. And not a day goes by. I take a light rail in from my home into the office, and I'll walk from there over to the office. And, there's several major intersections that I need to cross. And I use different devices that help me, but the greatest thing is when somebody comes up and just says, "Can I be of any assistance?" That's all it takes. Is there anything I can do to help you? Can I be of assistance? And 90+% of the time, I'll say, thank you very much for the offer. I'm okay. And then we might get into a conversation from there. But that's really what it's all about. Is there anything I can do to assist you? Can I help you in any way? Is a great way to open that opportunity. And sometimes there are, sometimes there's challenges with locating, a storefront, or, some crossing signals could be blocked by branches, and then you're listening to traffic and things. So there are times and opportunities to help assist and support somebody. And so it's as simple as that. And it goes a really long way, and it helps us feel part of the community and realize that, society is still good, right?
Without a doubt. Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely believe what, the most common reason why individuals would, as you said, part away or not get involved is the uncertainty. They, in today's day and age, people don't want to offend anybody, and everyone's like, well, it's easier for me to walk the other way. But actually, it's easier if you say, hey, can I help you? And it goes across a lot of different verticals, asking someone if you can help them. And, as you said, you might say, no, thanks, I'm good. But it doesn't sound like you're offended by someone asking you if they can help you. And I think some people's fear may be that question itself, they may, they don't want to impose, or they don't want to say, hey, you can't do something. But at the end of the day, I appreciate, you mentioned it, and I appreciate, for the audience listening. Yeah. I mean, one way that you can very easily help people is just, can I help you? Can I be of assistance? And someone may say, no, thank you. And that's fine. Or someone may say, absolutely. Can you help me cross the street? Can you help me get to this location? Can you, buy my next house, throw a couple jokes in there and see how they react to it.
Put my child through college.
No, okay, then I'm good for today.
I'm good. But no, and I say it all the time, and I shared it before. I'm the very first person, having been fully sighted prior to, my combat trauma. I didn't know any better, and I can remember growing up and seeing somebody coming down the street, and I tell people all the time, if I was on the other side and I'm coming at me swinging this white stick, I'm getting out of the way too. Hey, looking out and the other components. But again, there's really some great new emerging technologies from different types of navigation. I had a great experience. We recently were out in Arizona for an event, and I don't know if you have familiarity, but there's more and more autonomous vehicles beginning to team with the ride shares. And one of our groups that we work extensively with is Waymo and Waymo's autonomous vehicles. It's the first time for me in 30 plus years that I got into a vehicle by myself. I controlled the music. I controlled the climate. I was able to control everything. And I was by myself going where I wanted to go when I wanted to go there. Autonomous vehicles are amazing for the blind community. And that's going to open up tremendous opportunities. Those markets are continually expanding. They're in major cities now, and they're continuing those expansions. And the safety aspects speak for themselves about how safe this technology has become and all the components that are in there. But I can't even begin to imagine what the day is going to be like when there's an autonomous vehicle in my driveway. And when I want to commute to work, I just go out there and I program the vehicle and it takes me to where I want to go, or if I want to go shopping. That's going to be huge.
Close. It's very
It's
close.
It's very
yeah,
close.
It's very close to happening. I imagine I imagine it's there, just not publicly. I imagine they're probably just, there's safety testing and everything else that prevents it from hitting the public before it, before anything.
Yeah, that's exactly where it is,
okay.
Brad. They're there now as they're partnering and beginning, to saturate more and more of these markets and get more people comfortable, right? That's the biggest thing, is just getting all of us comfortable. Look, we have the technology in our car. My wife, is able to, on the highway, the car is literally driving itself. It's braking, it's identifying everything around itself. And so we continue to see more and more of an emergence of this tech and additional technology for this community. Meta has just released some phenomenal new glasses by Ray-Ban. They're off the shelf for a couple $100 with all of the embedded AI. And for me, this is great. It's in this very attractive Ray-Ban frame. The lenses are phenomenal, and I can literally now go out to a restaurant. I'm wearing a pair of glasses that have transition lenses, so nobody can tell the difference. They look really, really smart. But these are all powerful. In 2 seconds, I can identify the entire environment around me. It can lay out everything that's on the table. It can read the menu to me in my ear. Nobody knows anything that's going on. But I now have a full level of independence in that I can go out and enjoy a meal with friends or family and not be dependent on somebody else to tell me the menu or to tell me where food is on my plate or any of those other aspects, or where my drink is. And they're continuing to evolve with this technology, with more and more types of navigation and mapping and identification. Some of the biggest challenges are just privacy right now. And those I'm sure they'll be able to overcome in time. But, this is technology that was thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, a year ago. And it was very cost prohibitive for so many individuals. And now for a couple $100, you're getting it off the shelf, and it continues to evolve and emerge. So, yeah, the future's bright for the blind and low vision communities, for sure.
Yeah, technology advancements definitely have become affordable, accessible, and definitely have, as you said, I think it's incredible the impact that it has. The public often concentrates on the negative, and you don't hear any of this talked about, but it's like, well, actually one of the positives of autonomous vehicles, one of the positives of all this voice recognition technology, one of the positives of some of the advancements in these technologies is it does helps individuals with blindness, and I'm sure there's other disabilities that it assists people with. So it certainly is, certainly is important. I appreciate you sharing it. I think it's helpful for those out there to hear it.
Yeah, definitely leveling the playing field and ensuring, the equal opportunities again and you're 100% correct, whether it's individuals that are dealing with hearing loss, cognitive types of disabilities. Everybody's utilizing this technology, and it's improving and enhancing quality of life for all.
Yeah. So kind of last question here. It's something that I have my wife's brother, my brother-in-law. He's mostly blind. At birth, and he's done wonders for himself. He's on the fire company with me, or I joined after him, so I'm on the fire company with him. And one of the things we find out there is that there's not always a significant number of accessible jobs, if you will, for individuals experiencing blindness. Do you have any advice on that front? And does your organization also assist with employment assistance, or do you have any opinion there or any guidance there?
Yeah, so, first and foremost, just being cognizant of the fact that neurosurgery probably isn't a good option for those of us dealing with blindness, right? We're just never going to get into those types of fields. So there's always going to be some challenges for us out there and where we are. But there's tremendous opportunity. And again, I'll go back to what I stated earlier, and it is going to take additional time for awareness that's out there of just how able. So we use that differently, abled rather than disabled component. There's very little that we're not capable of doing. There's so many systems that are in place, and we're seeing modernization, right? So one of our programs that's out there is Ability One programs, right? And Ability One was always kind of structured workshops for persons with disabilities at all different levels, but it really did have a large population of blind individuals. But most of this was manufacturing. It was menial, to go in and assemble widgets, right? How many widgets can you do in a day, and blah, blah, blah. And then it was, the salaries were supplemented by the federal government, and that's where the programs were. But those programs are all modernizing now, right? They're getting into more and more of the tech sector and the tech space. And so whether that's CRM, different types of database systems, and building and designing, we're more and more into the coding and the IT sides of things, cybersecurity. I mean, you name it, we see individuals. I mean, we have blind individuals that are at NASA, in the command centers that are overseeing missions. So really the sky is the limit at that point in time. We I didn't get to experience it, but the individuals that came after me in the military, some of the folks that I serve alongside of at Blind and Veterans Association completed full 20-year careers in the military blind. We have individuals that are special forces qualified, totally blind, but still serving in leadership positions. And again, they're doing it differently, right? We're not expecting them to deploy with small arms into a combat zone, but we've had deployments with individuals that were blind and low vision. And so again, it's adjusting those skill sets. It's being sensitive to where our limitations are, understanding some of the safety concerns. But there's really, nothing that we can't do. And it's one of the things that we are so encouraged by. One of our more recent programs we stood up during the pandemic was what we call our ambassador program. And it was taking blind individuals and training them to, in partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs, go into their community development and civic engagement, their VA voluntary service programs, but be force multipliers for our visual impairment service team coordinators, helping them with case management and those other components. And so we've just seen individuals from their 90s, down into their 20s that are all engaged in these programs. And they're using that as a catalyst to then go back to school and to begin studying and looking for careers in everything, from social work to different types of trades and such. And so, it's all there. Wherever somebody's passion is, we encourage them to explore the opportunities and then adapt the environment. That's the whole thing, right? We adapt to whatever the needs are, and whether that's through assistive technologies or other deployments. And so I just think, there's nothing that we can't do.
I love that message, and it's definitely an important one to continue to relay. And I appreciate that. Appreciate that very much. So ultimately, I've been gleaning a lot of information from you. So ultimately, I'll ask it, the reverse way is, how can the public support Blind and Veterans Association and your mission? How can the public help support the hard work and the accomplishments that you've had and continue to have? How can they help support you?
Yeah, and thanks for asking that. Obviously, as a 501c3 and a congressionally chartered veteran service organization, we can't scale up our production of widgets because we don't produce widgets. And so we're totally dependent on society to help fund us. And so donations are always the biggest driver. That's what, both funds our operations as well as our programs and services. We fund everything from helping blind individuals scale the tallest mountains in the world. We have blind members that recently scaled Everest, to getting out there and just learning, what they are capable of, and whether that is, climbing mountains or getting back out and kayaking, surfing, sailing, playing golf, or any other of the assistive sports. Those are all part of the things that we fund through our programs and services, our ambassador training programs, our care review. We go out and we make sure that the 13 residential blind rehabilitation centers operated by the Department of Veterans Affairs are operating, properly. We have oversight as part of our congressional charter of those centers and some of the other areas. Vet Tech. We're doing a lot around the technology side with different companies that are out there with these emerging technologies and helping to educate our membership on how to utilize this technology to enhance their quality of life and their ability to integrate back into society. So that's what it drives down to. We encourage folks. We're doing an overhaul right now, modernizing our website, but it's very easy. It's bva.org, Bravo Victor Alpha. Oscar Romeo Golf. It's that simple, bva.org. Take a look at what we have there now. There's donation opportunities. Feel free to reach out to us for additional information. We're happy to engage and answer any questions that folks might have. But the thing that we always try to let folks know, Brad, is that giving is so multifaceted, right? There's opportunities to do everything from, planned giving, looking at wills and estates, corporate giving, corporate fundraising, organizing community events and helping identify charities and groups that can benefit from some of those different types of activities. So in kind, there's companies out there that have services that an organization such as ours need. And if they are able to donate some of those services, we've got some great partnerships with entities out there that, might provide printing services or IT support. And so the sky's always the limit and everything is welcome. And we welcome the opportunity to, again, help to educate, help to inform, but also be able to support. Sometimes, companies or communities are looking for individuals to come out and share messages. We're happy to get the right individuals out there to help support those initiatives and those efforts as well. So it's a two-way street. We give and get, and we welcome the opportunity to explore anything with anybody that's out there. But thank you for asking that. Allowing us the opportunity to share that.
Yeah, without a doubt. No, certainly, one of the goals here is to help raise awareness to the organization, raise awareness to the cause you serve, as well as raise awareness to ways that people that may be interested in the cause or may be interested in supporting it can. And so, as you mentioned, visit your website, bva.org, and which is good. I like short web addresses. It's easy to say and easy to remember. So certainly that's important, but definitely check it out. There's a lot of great information on the website itself, more information about programmatic activity, more information about how to donate, more information about the cause out there. So certainly a lot of great information. But yeah, really appreciate your time today, Don. And first and foremost, and I didn't say this in the front end, but thank you for your service to our country, both your active duty service as well as your continued service to many out there. So thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for your time and just sharing your wisdom. Obviously, you have a significant amount of experience and are doing great things for the world and doing great things for the individuals that you serve. So really appreciate your time today and really appreciate what you're doing for the world.
Brad, thank you so much. It was great to come together with you. We appreciate you as well. Appreciate having this platform and forum to share the messaging. So keep up the great work on your end as well. Thank you for this opportunity, and we'll look forward to future collaborations, hopefully, and opportunities to come together again.
Love it. And Warriors, thank you for listening. Subscribe and meet us right back here for another episode of With Them Civic Warriors. Bye, everybody.